They were alone, starving, and too young to survive. One of them weighed just 15 pounds and couldn't even eat solid food. What happened next became one of the most heartwarming rescue stories of 2025. The first call came in just after sunrise. A wildlife officer in Sullivan County, New York, had spotted something unusual near a remote hiking trail. A tiny black bear cub curled up beside a fallen log. No mother in sight, no tracks leading in or out, just a shivering, silent baby, barely breathing. Within hours, a second call came from Ulster County. Then another from Greene. And another. By the end of the day, 4 cubs had been reported, all in separate locations, all clearly orphaned. Something was wrong. At the Friends of the Feathered and Furry Wildlife Center in Hunter, New York, the phones didn't stop ringing. The staff, already stretched thin after a rough winter season, quickly realized this was no ordinary rescue week. "We've got an orphan cluster," said Sarah, one of the center's lead rehabbers, hanging up the phone with a frown. "And they're coming in fast." That evening, a wildlife truck pulled into the center's lot with 2 small cubs in crates. Both were silent. One was alert enough to raise its head. The other barely moved. "I don't think this one even weighs 10 pounds, the driver said grimly. Sarah opened the crate and gently lifted the smaller cub into a soft, fleece-lined bin. 7 kilos, she muttered. That's barely more than a house cat. Over the next 3 days, the center took in a total of 8 bear cubs from different parts of the state. Each story was the same. A lone cub, wandering, weak, no sign of its mother nearby. Theories circulated. Perhaps the late snowstorms had disrupted dens. Maybe the mothers had been hit by cars while foraging. Or worse, shot by poachers who never knew their targets had cubs nearby. But the center had no time to investigate. The cubs needed help. And fast. Each cub was given a number and weighed. The smallest, the one who had arrived first, was still under 8 kilograms. He couldn't even chew solid food. "Too young to be alone," Sarah said softly, placing a warm water bottle beside him. "Too small to be in this world without help." That night, the team stayed late. They prepared a special blend of formula, goat milk, and pureed baby food. The smallest cub, they nicknamed him Peanut, licked the mixture from a dropper with trembling determination. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The older cubs were stronger, some near 20 kilograms, but they were still dangerously underweight and dehydrated. They arrived with matted fur, cracked paws, and eyes dulled by exhaustion. Some were silent. Others cried out in confusion, calling for mothers who would never come. The center divided them into pairs based on size and strength. Every cub got its own heat pad, soft bedding, and a dedicated feeding chart. Sarah and her team slept in shifts, waking every 3 hours to feed, hydrate, and monitor vitals. "I feel like I'm back in the NICU," one volunteer joked, holding a sleepy cub against her chest. "No joke," Sarah replied, "except these babies grow claws." By the end of the first week, the cubs were still fragile, but they were alive. And that, for now, was enough. Peanut remained the weakest. Unlike the others, he couldn't yet stand on his hind legs. He preferred to stay curled into a towel, blinking slowly at the ceiling lights. But when Sarah walked into the room, he would lift his head and sniff the air, recognizing the scent of safety. He began taking tiny steps between naps, and by the 10th day, he tried to climb out of his bin, landing face first in a pile of blankets, but determined to try again. "We're rooting for you, little guy," Sarah whispered, lifting him gently back in. As word of the rescues spread, The center's small social media page lit up with shares and comments. 8 bear cubs rescued. Can they survive? Tiny orphan bear fights to live after losing his mom. Meet Peanut, the cub who drinks baby formula and refuses to quit. People from across the state donated formula, towels, heating pads, and stuffed animals. One child mailed a letter with a drawing of a bear and a note. Dear Bear, you are not alone. My Teddy and I are cheering for you. Sarah taped it to the wall. We are too, she whispered. Outside, spring was arriving. But inside the Wildlife Center, it was a season of second chances. Cubs who once cried all night now slept curled together in quiet warmth. Cubs who refused to eat now nuzzled bottles and made messy faces with soft fruit mash. And Peanut? He was still the smallest. But now, when Sarah opened the door, he didn't just sniff the air. He waddled to the edge of his pen, stood up on shaky back legs, and made a sound that wasn't quite a growl, but close. A whisper of the wild that still lived inside him. By the second month, the Wildlife Center had transformed. What had once been a quiet rehabilitation clinic for injured birds and small mammals was now echoing with the rumble of paws, the squeaks of protest, and the occasional crash of a plastic tub being flipped by a mischievous cub. The team at Friends of the Feathered and Furry had nicknamed them the Fuzzy Eight. Each cub had its own personality. There was Bruno, the largest and most curious. Maple, who liked to nap curled up with 2 stuffed raccoons. Socks, who kept trying to climb into the sink. And of course, Peanut, still the smallest, but no longer the weakest. Peanut had made progress. He could now eat small fruits on his own, and he'd developed a taste for mashed banana and sweet potatoes. He followed Sarah around like a shadow, tugging at her shoelaces or trying to climb her pant leg with his clumsy paws. He thinks I'm a tree stump, she laughed one morning as he perched himself on her boot and chirped softly. His fur had thickened. The dullness in his eyes was gone. He'd begun wrestling with socks and losing most of the time, but always trying again. Each morning, the team released the cubs into the large outdoor play enclosure, a secure, wooded area filled with logs, branches, climbing platforms, and kiddie pools. This was where they learned, not from people, but from each other. They chased, tumbled, climbed, and sometimes fell. They wrestled over food bowls. They learned boundaries and broke them. They discovered that pine cones were fun and that water hoses were terrifying. Sarah and her team watched from a nearby platform with binoculars, documenting behaviors. The goal wasn't just survival. It was rewilding. Rescue is only half the story, she explained to a visiting vet student. If they don't learn to be bears, they'll never make it out there. And they were learning. Slowly. Clumsily. But every pause step was progress. One afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled through unexpectedly. Rain pelted the roof of the indoor dens, and wind howled through the trees. Most of the cubs huddled together in the corner, confused and frightened. But Peanut? He crawled onto a stack of towels near the door and stared outside, eyes wide. He didn't cry. He didn't hide. He just watched. He remembers, Sarah whispered. As the weeks passed, the center shared more photos and videos online. Peanut climbing onto Maple's back. Bruno and Socks fighting over a watermelon slice. The whole group sprawled out in the shade, paws in the air. People began sending messages. We check on the bears every day. Peanut has become our morning joy. They give me hope in this messy world. Local students wrote essays. Artists sent paintings. A bakery even made Peanut's pie, with proceeds going to wildlife rehab. But the real joy came not from attention, but from transformation. By early July, all 8 cubs had doubled in weight. Bruno had cracked 50 pounds. Even Peanut, the runt, had reached 28, still the smallest, but no longer in danger. They no longer needed bottles. They crushed fruit, tore open logs, dug holes, and climbed trees. They had become, as one staff member joked, miniature tanks with fur. But they were more than that. They were survivors. The day Peanut climbed his first tree was the day the team knew he was ready. It wasn't tall, maybe 10 feet, but he clung to the trunk, paw over paw, and scrambled to the top with a triumphant squeak. The others watched, then followed. And soon the entire group was bouncing from branch to branch like wild, fuzzy acrobats. That night, Sarah stood alone at the edge of the enclosure. The cubs were asleep, curled into a pile near the base of an old oak. Moonlight filtered through the leaves. She exhaled slowly, a mix of joy and heartbreak in her chest. "They're ready," she said. The early morning air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. The forest was quiet, except for the soft hum of a diesel engine as the wildlife transport truck wound its way along a dirt road deep into the Catskills. Inside the truck, 8 crates were carefully secured, each lined with blankets, fruit mash, and familiar scents. Inside the crates, 8 young bears. Bigger now, stronger, wilder. They didn't know it, but they were going home. Sarah rode in the back, her gloved hand resting gently on the top of Peanut's crate. He was awake, alert, eyes scanning the narrow vents as if trying to understand what was coming. "You're not that scared little guy anymore," she whispered. "You're ready." He blinked slowly in response. Somewhere beside them, Bruno let out a short huff. Socks shifted and snorted, pawing at the crate wall. They were restless. It was time. The release site had been carefully chosen, a protected woodland area miles from any human settlement, dense with trees, streams, and natural shelters. There was food, water, space, and, most importantly, safety. A team from the Department of Environmental Conservation waited near the tree line, clipboards in hand, cameras ready. But no press. This wasn't for publicity. This was for them. One by one, the crates were unloaded. Each was carried carefully to the edge of the woods and placed facing the trees. The center's team stood back, hearts pounding. This was what they had worked for. Months of feedings, sleepless nights, weighing, cleaning, monitoring, caring. It had all led to this moment. Sarah moved to the front and looked at her team. "Are we ready?" No one answered, but they all nodded. She pulled the first latch. The crate door swung open. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Maple cautiously stepped out, her nose twitching, ears alert. She paused, looked back, and bolted into the trees. Socks came next, tumbling out with excitement, nearly tripping over his own paws. Bruno roared, a proud, clumsy sound, and charged out like a freight train, scattering leaves in his wake. One after another, the cubs returned to the world they were born for, until only one crate remained. Sarah knelt beside it. Inside, Peanut stared at her. He didn't move. For a moment, she thought he might refuse to go. "You don't have to be the smallest anymore," she said softly. "You're the strongest one I know." Then she opened the crate. He stayed inside for several seconds, then slowly stepped out. Not in a rush, not afraid. He walked forward into the grass, looked over his shoulder one last time, and disappeared into the forest. There were no cheers, no clapping, only the sound of wind moving through the trees and the soft sniffles of people who had given everything for these 8 small lives. That night, the center was quiet. The bear enclosure was empty. The toys, the towels, the bowls, all cleaned and put away. But the walls remained covered in photos, drawings, letters, a reminder that even the wildest hearts sometimes need help to find their way. In the following weeks, the center received reports from the release area. Camera traps showed young bears traveling together, splashing in streams, climbing trees, stealing apples from branches. They were healthy, strong, free. One video showed a small bear with a unique mark on its back paw, standing on hind legs, sniffing the air before wandering into the woods. Sarah smiled when she saw it. "Peanut," she whispered, "you made it." In the end, it wasn't the donations or the social media shares that mattered most. It was this, a second chance. 8 little orphans who were never supposed to survive, now thriving in the wild, where they belonged.